Welcome to the Loyal Opposition Podcast. I'm Bernie Flowers, one of Uncle Sam's wayward sons. I intend to talk about important topics every week in hopes of helping to improve our country and our way of life. I ask that you like, share, and subscribe as we try to grow the channel and defend America's middle class. So, let's get started. Our guest for this episode is Ohio Representative Josh Williams. Sir, I want you to talk a little bit about yourself, and rather than me fumbling an introduction, I'm just going to let you tell the people who you are.
Sure. First, I appreciate the opportunity to come on here today. I'm State Representative Josh Williams. I represent District 41 in Ohio. I'm finishing up my first term here in the Ohio House. I'm a practicing attorney. I'm a college professor at Adrian College, where I teach constitutional law, and criminal procedure. I'm a father and a husband and just an average Ohioan, but there's a little bit of a backstory of me going from being a homeless high school dropout to being disabled for almost a decade and fighting to be able to go to college. And in 5 years, I earned 3 degrees and became a practicing attorney and kind of gave back to my community by putting my career on hold and went into public service. So it's an honor, the honor of my life to serve my community.
Wow, what a story. That's impressive. I tell you, Representative, can I call you Josh?
Absolutely.
Outstanding. The people want to know what you know, and we've heard all these stories about migrants in Springfield, Ohio, and my hope is that you can separate truth from fiction. And I have a few questions I'd like to ask, if you don't mind. So, I'm going to go ahead and start. First of all, how did 20,000 Haitians show up in Springfield, Ohio all of a sudden?
Yeah, so it wasn't all of a sudden. It took over like a 2-year period. There was an initial influx. Then there was kind of word of mouth that brought in more family, more friends, and it just became a beacon for that community to come. And I think it was like a perfect storm. So there's not one individual I want to name, but there was a small group that owned a lot of rental properties in that community. And there's also some manufacturers in the surrounding communities that were struggling to be able to find employees when they were offering $14 and $15 an hour. With rising inflation from Biden, local communities were not able to, put food on the table with that type of wage. So instead of finding a way to, fight inflation or increase wages, they turned to an alternative, which was bring in workers that can live on that type of wage. And that's where we looked at these Haitian migrants that are getting this special status that was designed by Biden and Harris to allow them to work and live in our community while receiving thousands of dollars of benefits on the taxpayer's dime. So they are able to afford to live in that community because a large number of them will live in one house. They will be paying short transportation fees to local groups to transport them to and from work. And they can work for that lower wage because they're receiving a housing voucher. They're receiving a debit card with thousands of dollars on it every month, and they can afford to live off of that salary because they're being subsidized by our federal tax dollars. And it created a perfect storm, and that just attracted more and more and more of them. And we've been hearing about it for about 2 years now. I've been hearing from constituents before President Trump kind of brought it to the forefront with his accusations. That just formed a spotlight on what we had already been hearing about the housing crisis, where landlords were kicking out tenants that normally would pay $800 a month to bring in a large group of migrants, and they're making $3,000 and $4,000 and $5,000 and $6,000 off of that same house. That neighbors are reporting that they're getting pressure to sell their homes so they can rent it out to migrants. Hearing that there was an increase in car insurance policies because of how many migrants came across with these dollars that are on these debit cards, buying cars, they're unlicensed, uninsured, and driving in the community causing accidents. And as a result, the insurance company started to up the premiums on everyone in the community because of the risk of accidents going up in that community. These are real life problems that are happening in Springfield. They're not imaginary. We've been hearing about it for a long time now. And because of Trump's comments, finally we get a chance to talk about it.
Wow. Well, I have a tie to this. I spent a significant time at DHS and DOD, but in 2021, I remember 18,000 Haitians showed up at the Border Patrol station down in El Paso, Texas, in Eagle Pass. And bottom line is those people just were fanned out by the federal government. And I always wondered where those people went. And I believe the majority of them ended up in Springfield. And so that's a very, very bad thing for the Americans who live there. And but I have more questions for you. How is the local government handling the influx of all these new people?
They're struggling, right? They're hearing from constituents that, housing prices are going through the roof, the cost of living is going through the roof. But even more importantly, with these immigrants comes children that are non-English speaking. So when all of a sudden you're a community of around 58,000 and 20,000 people come in, 1/3 of your total population come in, and now you get a new 2,000 students coming into your school district that are non-English speakers, it really puts a drain on resources. It puts a drain in that classroom where teachers have to allocate more and more of their time to students that are years behind their American peers and they're non-English speaking, but they're going to be placing your child's classroom, taking away classroom instructional time that could be meant for your student. These are real drains on the government, and then including the drain on the healthcare, whether it's the local clinics, local primary care doctors, or emergency rooms. These individuals are coming across with high percentages of chronic illness, untreated chronic illnesses, sometimes even life-threatening viruses and conditions that now us as taxpayers are going to be left holding the bill for these individuals. So it's also putting a strain on healthcare resources when, an American in Springfield has a sick child, they may not be able to get into that doctor as quickly because of the total volume of people that are now coming into that community.
Amazing. You elaborated to the fact that the American government is giving people these vouchers. Can you elaborate a little bit more about who's paying the upkeep of these new migrants that have come into Springfield?
Yeah, so there's programs through the federal government, refugee program, in order to be able to give these type of housing vouchers, housing stipends, sometimes they call it, and these type of debit cards that give what some of the migrants are saying is, they're magic cards, they're unlimited amounts of money because they're not used to seeing $3,000 and $4,000 and $5,000 a month being placed at their disposal. And that money is coming from somewhere. I mean, that's why we're seeing inflation. The amount of government spending causes inflation. We're going to be the ones that end up paying that back. And they're literally giving money to these migrants, that has to be paid back eventually by our kids and our grandkids. And it's unfortunate that the policies that are coming out from our, formerly considered border czar, Kamala Harris, she's not taking ownership of this, but we're seeing it where every single state is now a border state. We said that for a long time and people didn't believe us. That even Ohio is classified as a border state because the federal government is voluntarily flying migrants from outside the U.S. into our communities.
Absolutely insane. Representative, can you tell us about local business and where these new migrants are expected to work and if they're actually supporting themselves?
Yeah, some of the migrants we've seen are able to get jobs at some of the manufacturers that not only are in Springfield, but the surrounding area. We've talked to a couple of those manufacturers who say they found some good employees in some of these Haitian migrants. But the reason that individual can work there is because they're being subsidized. So they don't have the same economic pressure on them about how much money they need to generate per month to pay their bills like an American citizen. Instead, they're cutting the line and being able to get in there knowing that once those subsidies turn off, they're not going to be able to survive on those type of funds, and they're going to turn to public assistance permanently. And that's just the reality of what's going to go on in our community. So, we're a nation of immigrants, right? But at the same time, we have to have our laws respected because you can't just overwhelm a community in a short amount of time, even if it's 2 years, a short amount of time with 1/3 of their population being added on top, especially when we already have a housing crisis, when we already have record inflation, where we already have a problem with our schools being underperforming. This is just adding icing on the cake.
Wow. Here's a big question for you. Are migrants really eating pets in Ohio?
It's a great question. So listen, I'm a lawyer. I operate by facts. I don't speculate. I can't say whether or not they are or not. What I can tell you is that I've personally read police reports where neighbors are reporting this type of activity. I've personally listened to 911 calls where residents are reporting this type of activity. And I've personally seen photographs of individuals walking down the street with animals, not personal pets, but ducks and geese from the local park. We've seen these images. We've heard these 911 calls. We've read these police reports. That doesn't mean those accusations are true, but as a representative of our people, we're simply giving a voice to their complaints, right? We're bringing a spotlight to those issues that are arising out of that community. So I'm not going to tell you whether or not I think it's true or false. That's not my position. What I can tell you is it is true that people are making those complaints, those allegations in those communities. Absolutely. I've seen the 911 calls. I've seen the police reports. And whether or not those things are being properly investigated, that's up to the Springfield law enforcement. I know that our governor has allocated additional resources, especially in the healthcare side, to try to take the pressure off of local government and primary care physicians and the local emergency room. But other than that, I have no way to confirm or deny those accusations whatsoever.
Well, let's talk more about the people. I mean, the citizens, the actual rank and file people that live in Springfield. How are they coping with all this? I mean, an extra 20,000 people in a city of, 60, 70,000 people, that's got to be an impact. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, they're raising hell. It isn't just Springfield. We've seen it across the nation, right? When we started, all of a sudden, the idea was open borders are fine. They're okay. But as soon as, Texas started busing them directly into Chicago and New York, and all of a sudden you started to see a large number come into those cities. And where were they putting them? They were putting them in low-income communities and taking resources away from the residents. And the residents are starting to uprise about that and go to the city council meetings and go to their township trustees and say, hey, this isn't right. If this money was available to support migrants, why wasn't that money available to support me as an Ohioan? I mean, I've lived in poverty, right? I have permanently hearing loss from how many ear infections I had as a child. At the age of 5, I had dead roaches surgically removed from my ears because of the conditions I was living in. I have what's called central auditory processing disorder that I live with for the rest of my life. And my wife likes to take advantage of that when she walks away talking slide to me. She likes to walk away where she knows I can't hear her. But this is a real issue. I was raised in those conditions, and I was able to work hard and dig myself out of those positions because there was government programs that I could use, like Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, which helped pay my tuition to help me initially get into college. And then I took the initiative from there and kept going and became a lawyer. But those programs were available for me. So I think it's reasonable for Ohioans and Americans in general to ask, well, where is all this money coming from? Because when I was struggling, the money wasn't there for me. Yeah. When I was on welfare, the money wasn't there to send me to college for free. The money wasn't there, to give me free housing. You didn't give me that much money. I know veterans that are getting pennies every month towards food stamps. $13 a month I've seen. And then I tell them that there's a person that has never worked a day in their life inside the United States. They've never served a day in their life in our military, and they're getting $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month, depending on their family size. And our veterans are homeless. Our veterans are sleeping under sleeping on park benches and under bridges.
Totally,
they're struggling with their mental health. They're struggling with their actual medical treatments through the VA. You're telling me this money's available for people that didn't fight and die for this country, that haven't lived here, haven't gone through, all the struggles that we've gone through in our American history. The money's there for them. But when it's actual Americans asking for help, we get told we don't have anything for you.
Wow.
I think that's a reasonable complaint by people in Springfield and across America.
Wow. You know, I am just dumbfounded, but I got another question for you. With my background again, all this time working in the government, I couldn't tell why the government chose Springfield. Can you tell me why the government chose Springfield to deposit all these migrants?
Yeah, I haven't seen any evidence that it was like a conscious choice of the feds. The problem is that once you give the special parole status and you give legal immigration status to individuals, we can't control where they end up in the United States. Then what happens is you get NGOs, non-government organizations, or local entrepreneurs like what we had in Springfield, where a new temp agency was created to go out and seek out those jobs where they were going to hire the migrants who have work privileges to work in those factories and in those shops, that those people were the ones drawing them to Springfield with the promise of being able to work and having housing available for them. We've heard reports from several residents about landlords kicking out families and then bringing in migrants and charging $250 a cot to put a migrant up and having 10, 20 of them inside of one house. We've heard those stories on the ground from residents that are in fear of being kicked out of their own rental property, or neighbors that own their property and being fearful that the 6 houses to their left or to the right are now rented only exclusively to a large number of migrants. We've heard those concerns. So it's definitely a problem here in Springfield, more than just the accusation of eating cats and dogs. It's real economic problems here in Springfield. And I don't know if the feds intended that. I have no direct evidence of that, but it is a direct byproduct of the weak open border immigration policies of Kamala Harris. It absolutely is. She took pride in that. She took pride in trying to defund the border wall. Now she comes out with a campaign ad saying she's going to build the border wall. It's absurd but it's an election cycle. People say whatever they want to say to get elected. Luckily, I don't run that type of campaign.
There you go. Well, as a representative of the state of Ohio, what is the consensus of the state house? What do you guys think, the elected officials?
I don't like to speak on behalf of the entire state house. I can only speak in regards to my office's position and what I've articulated to my colleagues and what they've articulated to me. This is a problem and we want to solve it. And we've gone through open discussions about what we legally can do and can't do. And, one is, I understand that this is a situation where there's a lot of legal migrants that are coming, but there's also a large number of illegal migrants that are coming to our communities draining resources. And that's why I introduced House Bill 666. I hate that bill number, by the way. But it's the Protecting Ohio Communities Act, which says if you want to be a sanctuary city or county, you can do so under home rule authority, but we're going to withdraw 10% of the local government funds that come from the state of Ohio. That you are going to have to try to get those funds from your local voters so they have a voice in whether or not they want to be a sanctuary city. And I guarantee the voters are going to say, heck no.
Well, I'm very pleased to see you doing something about it and taking this on as a representative of the people, and I applaud you. Now, let's get a little bit lighter here. There's a lot of memes floating around all over the internet ever since President Trump said what he said. So with that said, do you think that these are going to have any effect on the election? And, what do you think about those memes? Because they are very funny.
They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, eat the cat, eat the cat. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, eat the cat, eat the cat.
I think they're great. Especially with AI technology to be able to generate some of these ones with President Trump running with the cats and dogs. It was fun to see some of those things. But, sometimes it takes that joking approach to highlight a serious problem.
Yeah.
Do I think those memes are going to sway voters one way or the other? No. But what I think is going to happen is it starts a conversation just like we had today between you and I, where they're going to ask the same, is that really happening in Springfield? And then if they're around some educated constituents of mine, I've spoken on this publicly, they may say, hey, These are the things that we hear is actually going on in Springfield, and this is why it's a concern. And it's not just Springfield. I'm getting reports of other small communities in Ohio that are starting to get these large numbers of Haitians and other individuals coming through this parolee program that get instant work status and are coming to our small communities that are already struggling because of the loss of manufacturing jobs over the last 20 years. And they're struggling to pay their bills, and boom, here they're popping up again because the cost of living is low in those communities, but you can't afford to live with the inflation if you are relying solely on your salary. And these people can come in and they don't have those same economic burdens on them because they're getting cards with thousands of dollars on it. They're getting housing vouchers, and they're able to buy used cars, no insurance, no license, and drive in our communities, causing havoc. And it's unfortunate that I'm getting more and more calls from communities saying, hey, we just had 1,000 of them move in the last 6 months. Are we going to turn into the next Springfield? So those memes are just a conversation starter is what I'm hoping. And it's putting it in the minds of voters that immigration and immigration reform should be maybe number 2 on your list of topics when you walk into that voting booth this year. The economy and inflation should be number 1. Number 2 definitely should be immigration and immigration reform.
Representative Williams, the floor is now yours. Say what you will to the people.
Well, I appreciate the time to come on and talk about, this topic. I'm pretty open book. I'm willing to take any interview by any interviewer. And talk about these topics. I continue to work hard here in the state of Ohio for my constituents. Even though I'm a freshman finishing out my first term, I'm the top rated Republican in the Ohio House on numbers of bills introduced and co-sponsored. As of today, I've introduced 27 unique pieces of legislation. I've I've co-sponsored 189 pieces of legislation. I'm number 2 in the entire state legislature behind my colleague that I respect very highly, Senator Jerry Serino, who's working very hard to keep that title because I'm going to catch up to him. But that's not just putting my name on bills. That's working very hard for my constituents, being in committees, coming up with ingenious ideas, talking to my colleagues about their legislation and maybe fixing or changing portions of it to make it easier to pass. And unfortunately, we've had the slowest General Assembly in over 70 years in the Ohio legislature, with the least amount of bills passed since I think it's 1955 or 1958. And hopefully this November we'll have a change in the way our House and Senate are structured and a number of representatives, and we can get back to the work of the people, and a little snippet of what is part of my legislative agenda moving forward. In January, if reelected, I'll be introducing legislation to require Ohio to be a full-time legislature where we're in Columbus X amount of days per week. We are required to be in our offices X amount of days per week. We will be required to work in our districts X amount of days per week. And we can truly be held accountable by the voters here in the state of Ohio because there's a lot that needs to be done. And there's very limited time when you have a General Assembly of 2 years. And if the bill doesn't pass in 2 years, you start from scratch. So there's work to be done, not just in Ohio, but across our nation. I pray that voters get out and vote early, vote early. Don't be afraid of voting early and banking our vote so our campaign resources can go towards those individuals who have not voted yet. Make sure you hit the polls, and God willing, we will still maintain Republican control in all 3 branches here in the state of Ohio.
Outstanding. Josh, how can people reach you if they need to?
So they can reach out on my website, joshwilliamsforohio.com. They can reach out to me on all social media platforms. On Twitter, it's Josh Williams OH. Josh Williams for Ohio on Facebook. I'm pretty easily accessible. All you got to do is Google Ohio, Josh Williams, and I pop right up on Google. There's a lot of things that I'm doing here in the state, and I'm responsive to constituents both inside and outside of my district to reach out to me and ask about issues. We're pretty responsive from my office, and you'll be surprised. There's a lot of people that write me an email and then they end up with a phone call from me, and they're like, I never expected a state representative to call me. Well, you raised an important issue, and I want you to know that I'm addressing it. So don't be surprised if you get that phone call if you leave your phone number behind.
There you go. Well, Representative, thank you for answering these questions and clarifying what's going on in Ohio. The people at Veterans for America First really appreciate you, and we want you to do well. And I just want to thank you personally. America thanks you for what you are doing, and thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Amen. Well, that's about it for now. This has been the Loyal Opposition Podcast, produced in association with Fallback Productions and Veterans for America First. Please like, share, and subscribe as we try to grow the channel and protect America's middle class. Be sure to get your copy of my book, Black Values Matter, available as an ebook on Amazon, Audible, and Apple Books. And also, remember, it's okay to disagree. But if we want our country to prosper, we must insist on unity, transparency, and civility for ourselves and for our fellow citizens. Thanks for listening to the Loyal Opposition Podcast. We'll see you next week.